Oh, good morning. It's day
Day
30.
30, 30
Unbelievable.
of 30.
Yeah, we kind of had our vision set on day 30, thinking, how much longer do we have anything to say? And can we maintain our, I don't know, our commitment to this project, which is now 60 conversations?
Yeah, if you recall, we kind of modeled off the ESPN model of 30 for 30, those 30 films. And so when the pandemic started, we just more as a lifeline to ourselves than to anybody who might be watching. We just thought it might be nice to have, this community where we can get together and be together alone. Right. And so here we are then with a second round. We waited a year, and we're really almost to the day a year after we ended the last round. And dare I say this out loud, maybe once a year we come back and regenerate. Um,
Really interesting. I think that one of the things that makes me vulnerable about doing this is that all of us are continually growing in our practice and our understandings. And will you look back and go, oh, why did I think that? I think that it's such a natural part of teaching that you continue to grow and think and learn and do better.
when you look at who we had in this round of 30, there were a lot of times where I said to myself, I need a moment to think about that. After the interview was over, I needed to kind of come back and think about it. And that's, even after all these years of teaching, that it's constantly evolving craft.
And there's a couple things that have been in my head a lot. There was a thread on Twitter where um, somebody confessed that they've left teaching, and even with only a month left in the year, just couldn't do it anymore. And I say confessed because it sounded a bit apologetic, although the responses were beautiful from people all over saying, we understand. And as I read through it, how many others said, oh, I left a few years ago. And I know that the numbers say we're going to lose 30% of the teaching force this year. And I think there's this tension between being able to say, this September will be my 38th year of teaching, which sounds like that's the bar when that's not what I mean. I don't think you have to stay in this work for decades, but I do lament what you lose when you leave, what the profession loses when people leave. And I worked with new teachers, as you know, for years, and so many were gone at the 3-year mark, 4-year mark. Just not the work they thought it would be.
Well, then you drop the pandemic on top of everybody, and the level of exhaustion, the level of commitment. I have to say, I'm just so impressed with, people stepping up. I think Kylene Beer said in one of our conversations, you don't have to be overly stressed. You could just mail it in and not, step up. But almost all the teachers that I've worked with and all the teachers that we've been interacting with, they just step up during a pandemic. And I like to think the job will never be easy, ever. I think that's kind of what makes it great in a way. But I'm hoping that when the pandemic, next school year might be a little easier for teachers as things come back to a little bit of normalcy.
Yeah, we'll see, won't we? I was on there's something that's come out of the pandemic which is concerning. And I was on a poetry group last week where two comments really struck me. One was Lily Howard Scott said, some of the learning this year will be the biggest learning of their lives. To counter that lost year, and there's such a tension there as well between, well, how can education be valuable if they could be out of the classroom for a year and we can't call it a loss? There's that voice. And then there's the voice of access to books and to socialization. I watched this with my granddaughter, really struggling to know how to interact with other little kids, which she would know by now at 3.5, but has been isolated for so long. And so I think that there's that, but it was also on that same call that Donna Santman, who was in our first 30 days, said she shared this incredible novel in verse that one of her eighth graders created during the pandemic. And she said, somebody said on the call, how did you get her to do that? And she said, Penny taught me to get out of their way, which I would never take credit for anything Donna knows, but the idea of get out of their way was so powerful for me. So classrooms, conditions that give kids freedom to explore and create, to me, are still the goal. And I think a lot of teachers leave. I know many I have known have, because administration and mandates get in the way of what they know is the right thing to do.
I
That's what
don't,
makes me sad.
I'm probably going to step in it here, but I don't think it has to be an either or. I mean, I think there is loss and I think there is gain, and I think there's tremendous opportunity in that gain. But I do think there's loss as well. I know kids in my school district, who have been in crowded apartments for, 9 months now, trying to do schoolwork with, with family members surrounding them. But there is a gain there too. I mean, I'm thinking of, like, one of our guests was Ernest, right? Dr. Ernest Morel. And this is his pinned tweet, which he pinned right shortly after we had our discussion. He said, what if we asked every kid in America next fall as an assignment to tell us what they learned during the pandemic, how they grew, how they are different, and what they wanted to do next? This could represent they could represent this multimodally and share within the community. Like, what a way to launch the next school year, is to talk about what you've learned, what strength you've gained, what insight you've been given after going through a time that did take some things away from you.
Yeah, and I'm not going to disagree with Dr. Ernest Morel and Mr. Kelly Gallagher. I'm not going to stand on one side or the other. I understand what you're trying to say, but the learning loss narrative has a long history in our culture of being a way to mandate curriculum, testing, to mandate programs, to pay companies in ways to make up a loss or to speed up curriculum, or the language leads to bad things in teaching. And so no one is going to say that kids didn't miss out on chances to work together on projects in productive and interesting ways. I miss the laughter in my classroom that I didn't hear much online, but that I think that it is a weapon, learning loss. And I just think that the problem I have with that tweet and that idea is that many kids lost things they don't want to write about that are the most important things. And it isn't that we're dictating, but anytime it's an assignment, Linda Reef and I've been talking a lot about this because she's doing the photo a day thing that you're doing. Mm-hmm. She no longer wants to do it. She said, it's an assignment. Every morning I got to get up and do this thing that I committed to, and that it can wear on your reflective possibility. Like, you don't sit and think about, what do I kind of want to write about? And so I won't be assigning that. What I'm going to spend my whole first unit on this fall is identity. And of course, some of that will have been forged during, and we'll talk about it and we'll write about it in notebooks and things, but it won't be a finished piece or a project that they have to do.
Just as a brief aside, and we're not really going to go there today, but Penny is referring to a project we both thought about and started, and that is that I pick a photograph every day and I write to it every day. And I'm going to try it for a year, and I'm about 50 days in, 60 days in.
And I haven't done it once.
I actually enjoy it. I actually like the structure of it. It gets me going in the morning. It gives me a purpose and something to look.
Isn't that Kelly, right there is the tension for why we use poetry, et cetera, in quick writing. Because some people, if you give them the freedom, come to the page and have something to say, and some are going to sit there and go, and then that can get them going. So yes, but how do we allow for both? How do we give students the support to learn like that 20,000 words class. I loved his vision that, David's not telling them which genre even,
Mhm.
just that your goal is to get a lot of words on the page.
So I don't want to cut you short. Did you have a second big idea, or did you weave that
No,
in?
those two together, some of the learning this year will be the biggest learning of their lives, and then Donna's get out of their way.
Mhm. So we didn't plan this last discussion. We wanted it to be kind of real. But I did, prior to coming on, and did not really discuss this with Penny. I went back and I looked at the 29 discussions that we've had in this round of 30. And I was struck by, and I think this is related, of course, to getting out of their way, but I was struck by kind of two major themes. We had all kinds of guests talking about all kinds of different things. But the two themes the first theme that really kind of jumped out at me was this sort of curricular responsiveness, to get out of cookie cutter mode and to be responsive to the kids who are in your classroom, which of course will be the major topic of conversation coming out of the pandemic when meet the kids. But I'm thinking of, my superintendent, Mike Matsuda, who said there's this growing disconnect between K-12 and the university and K-12 in the world. And I think a reason behind that is that the schools have lost that connection with being relevant and responsive to kids' life. And we had a whole bunch of guests kind of get into that. I want to say Ernest Morel, which I read that tweet. I'm thinking that the young teacher from the Bronx that we interviewed, Izzy Tahid, who talked about taking her kids out in the neighborhood. You're in the middle of all these freeways. You have higher incidence of asthma. There's problems with the water. It's project-based, it's community-based. Jeff Wilhelm talked about having kids pick their own big projects. Tom Newkirk said, let the kids write fiction, let the kids follow their muse a little bit, right? David Rockhour talked about 20,000 words, but didn't tell you what the 20,000 words were. And so there's this theme that ran through that if we're going to engage kids, we have to back away from them and give them space to explore things that are inquisitive, that generates inquiry and interest.
Mhm. I agree.
I'd also go ahead.
No, I was just kind of thinking about that theme, and I think it's interesting because I work at a university now and I see the world a little differently. And we are the first ones to say K-12 is out of step with what the university expects of kids. I mean, across my campus, that's what everyone would say. These kids are not curious. They're not engaged with their learning. They're not critical problem solvers. They wait to be told what to do. So that's a really interesting piece. It isn't, in fact, my university, and I'm not trying to say that the universities have it all figured out, but rather they have interdisciplinary courses, seminars, they have lots of creative and innovative majors that didn't exist when I was there that are attempting to adapt to what's happening in the world. How can you have Google certificates, which I'm sure you've looked into? They aren't competing, they're just a different path. And so I feel like, yes, what Mike said is critically important. We are, as a country, this shift to what do kids actually need and how do we deliver it? And more than anything, all I can say is kids should be hungry to learn and they need safe spaces to do that. And so I'm disgusted with the narrative on many of the cable news networks about teachers unions getting in the way of kids going back to school during COVID and all of this. And I'm like, just walk through those buildings and live in one where there's no ventilation and there's no soap in the soap dispensers. And these places that we house kids, these warehouse type schools, to me, it's, why would a kid be excited to go there if they don't have current science equipment and they don't have anything but rote learning? So there's a lot of work that's possible, but I've been so inspired over these conversations listening to teachers who are doing it against all odds. Listen to Ernesto yesterday. A kid sends him a draft at any point, 70 pages, he's all on. You could hear it in his voice. the love for what he
Mhm.
does and what he brings to those kids.
I want to also say, as part of a sub theme of that first theme that I noticed, is there's a byproduct, a good byproduct of when you offer kids responsive curriculum, that you're arming them in a world that is hard to read. It's hard to read accurately.
Mm,
And so I heard a lot of that from Jeff Wilhelm when he talked about information pollution, which I thought was an interesting term. Kylene Beers and Bob Probst's book, Forged by Reading, really get into, how to cut through, um, you know, stale curriculum, how to cut through and give kids responsive things to read and think about. Um, that it's not just, you know, giving them a project to do, but it's doing it in a way that helps them be literate far after high school.
yep. And I think that the after high school thing continues to be a question. What do we need in the world? And what kind of programs get kids prepared to do that work?
The second thing I noticed in the threads and I just think this has been forever as part of good teaching, is beyond the curricular responsiveness. There's sort of a personal responsiveness to that child sitting in front of you, either on the screen or in your classroom. The two young teachers who were book love winners, Gabrielle and Victoria, they talked about the importance of building relationships with kids, especially in a time like this. You mentioned Ernesto, who we talked about yesterday, about how his kids actually gave him input on the novel that he wrote, that personal connection. Sarah Ahmed, right, came in and talked about the importance of fostering cultural identity and making that as part of it. I think of Colleen Cruz, who said, part of connecting with kids is, as a teacher, recognizing when you make a mistake, what kind of mistake you have just made, and what's that idea. There's more than one kind, the different kinds of mistakes, I think was really novel for me. And how you respond to mistakes in a way is a central part of building that connection with kids. And I'll just say one or two more. Sarah Zerwin's idea of not grading is another way to remove that barrier between kid and teacher. And then last but not least, one of my favorite people, Chris Tavani's idea of we would be much better teachers if we could recognize the masks that kids are wearing. And as you pointed out, I thought very astutely in that conversation, the masks that teachers are wearing is another way to build, and I've said this in other conversations, but it was very late in my career before I realized how much that love of kids is so important to their learning, to their motivation, to their desire. And so that whole, I look at all these great teachers we've had on, and I feel incredibly fortunate that you and I are in a position we can have these conversations with just these fantastic teachers. But that thread of sort of get to know the kid, what really, really was important, I think.
Mm, absolutely. So I have a poem for us. Linda Reef and I are running a writing group on Monday nights, and she shared this last night, which from one of our favorites, Kim Stafford.
Mm.
And I just want us to think together about this: the curse of the charmed life. Things pretty much worked out for you. You have what you need, and if you need more, you have people ready and able to provide. Sure, someday your luck will run out and you'll be helpless, then gone, and your people will gather in your honor. There will be music and tears. People will embrace for you. There'll be an odd buoyancy, a chatter of kind words, blessing. But the curse of this charm is exile from the unlucky. How gifts make you deaf to the sudden shout of a man camped in the ravine, make you blind to the dirty face of a woman with a cardboard sign. Without hunger, it's easy to be heartless. Without hurt, you are disabled. Without the battering of bad luck, the pummeling of lost hopes, the wounds of life without love, of dark dreams that last past dawn. How can you know what one life might do for another? And I think, like Robert Frost, that last line should repeat. How can you know what one life might do for another? I think the reason that I wanted to share that is that's what teachers are doing in their gift of being a teacher and being in a classroom with kids. Is they're taking that life they have and helping kids, supporting kids, you know, the many ways that teachers have to give day after day after day is a gift.
It's a beautiful poem. I've never read that poem before. And I think in terms of, if you've been in the game a long time and that morning you wake up and all of a sudden there's an email from a kid you had 20 years ago that I think in the stream of the difficulty of the job, you lose sometimes that connection that you are making a difference in kids' lives. If it was easy, everybody would do it and it would be fine, right? But it's hard. And I just think that's a beautiful poem to end, I think. I don't know if we're ending, but that would be a nice
Yeah,
poem
it was kind of my intent, was just to thank teachers for being teachers, because there will be in every teacher's life days when you're like, I don't think I want to do this anymore. I just don't. I had a tough class, I had a tough week, and there's something inside of people that we know that gets them back up and in their rooms the next day.
Funny, I haven't thought about this in years, but I can remember even like mid-career going, I don't know if I'm going to stay with this. It's really too hard. I
Mhm.
remember that, getting up and going, oh my God, this is hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And just teachers have so many other opportunities. And
Yeah.
there's no shame in deciding to go do something else. That's not at all what I'm trying to say, but that there are gifts that come when you hang in there. And so we know a lot of the people who watch us have hung in there.
We consider amongst our gifts, those of you who have been watching and some of the really nice comments you've been posting on our various sites. And so we're sustained by knowing that these conversations were meaningful to a lot of you. And I want to thank Penny for her insight, as always, makes me a better teacher and a person. And well, I don't know, maybe we'll do it again.
Yeah, likewise. But before we go, Kelly, who is your picture of the day behind you? Since some people have noticed you change that every once in a while, like
I
every day.
change I change pictures once in a while. Okay.
Yeah.
So my 60th birthday, we threw an 80s party. And believe it or not, that's me with the red bandana on. That's my wife, Kristen, in the middle. And we're actually on stage with a band that's rocking out. And so that's just my little fun picture of the day to remember not to take life, find those moments where you can get away and recharge and have a little bit of fun.
Yeah, one of my favorite Kelly Gallagher qualities is your sense of humor. So thank you for these conversations. And friends, we will be back together, we hope, sometime this year. Thank
Be
you.
well. Be well. Thank you,
Bye.
everybody. Bye-bye.